ever get that feeling?
Yeah.
Like the system's rigged against you. Like no matter how hard you try, you just can't get ahead.
Yeah.
Well, imagine living in a society where that wasn't just a feeling, but the law of the land.
Mm.
That was France before the revolution. A powder keg of inequality just waiting to explode.
Right.
And today we're going to dive deep into the social structure of France under what they call the old regime
Okay.
to understand why things, why they reached that boiling point.
Right.
We've got some fascinating historical analyses to work with, and we've even got a firsthand account
Oh, wow.
from an Englishman named Arthur Young who traveled through France
Okay.
in 1788,
Oh, wow.
right on the eve of the revolution.
Wow. So he was right there.
He was right there.
Just as things were about to go crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's so fascinating about this is French society was literally divided by law.
Mm.
We're not just talking like social classes here,
Right.
but legal estates. Imagine a world where your legal rights, your opportunities, even your tax burden
Yeah.
were determined by which of these estates you were born into.
You were born into it and that was it.
Yeah.
That was your destiny.
Okay, so let's break down this whole estate system
Yeah, let's do it.
because I have a feeling it's going to be key to understanding, why the French Revolution even happened.
Absolutely. It's essential.
Yeah.
So at the top, you had the first estate, the clergy,
Boy,
and they made up less than 1% of the population,
tiny.
but controlled something like 10% of the land. Talk about punching above your weight.
Wow, yeah.
And then you had the second estate, the nobility.
Okay.
Also a tiny sliver of the population, maybe 1.5%.
Okay.
But they held about 20% of the land.
Okay.
And then everyone else. The peasants, the shopkeepers, the doctors, even wealthy merchants, all crammed into this thing called the third estate.
So let me get this straight. 98% of the population
Yeah,
was lumped into one estate.
one estate.
That seems like a recipe for trouble.
It certainly didn't create a sense of unity. And here's the kicker.
Okay.
The first and second estates, these privileged orders, enjoyed exemptions from most taxes.
Oh, wow.
They lived lives of luxury while the third estate shouldered the burden of, financing the country.
Yeah.
You can imagine the resentment that brewed
Oh, yeah.
under those conditions.
So not only was it unequal in terms of, like, wealth and power,
Right.
but it was literally built into the law
Yeah.
that the majority of people had to pay
Mm-hmm.
for the lifestyles.
For the lifestyles of the elite.
of the elite few.
Yeah, it was a system designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many.
Okay, so it was really baked into the whole
Oh, yeah.
system.
Baked right in.
Yeah, yeah.
And it gets even more complex when you look within the estates themselves.
Oh, interesting.
Like, take the first estate, the clergy.
Okay.
While the church as a whole was immensely wealthy,
Yeah.
that wealth wasn't evenly distributed.
Oh, interesting. So even within that kind of privileged group,
Right.
you had haves and have-nots.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me more about that.
So you had your higher clergy, often from noble families themselves,
Hmm.
living in these opulent palaces, enjoying extravagant lifestyles, think bishops and archbishops.
Okay. Yeah.
And then you had the lower clergy, the parish priests, the curates,
Okay.
who often came from humble backgrounds and lived much simpler lives, much closer to the struggles of their parishioners.
So there was a whole hierarchy within
Within the church itself.
the church itself.
Exactly.
Did that cause any tension, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. The sources we have really highlight this disparity. There's one particularly striking example.
Oh, okay.
The Archbishop of Strasbourg was earning 1,500 times more
Wow.
than the lowest paid curate.
That's wild.
Now, imagine being that poor curate preaching about humility and poverty
Yeah.
while your superior is living like royalty.
That's a huge gap.
It is.
I can see how that kind of inequality, even within the church itself,
Right.
might have contributed to this, to people questioning authority in general.
Exactly.
Like if the church, this supposedly moral institution,
Mhm.
is riddled with these glaring disparities,
Uh,
what does that say about the entire system?
yeah. What does that say about the whole system?
Yeah.
It's a point worth pondering. And this issue of internal division wasn't limited to the church.
Hmm.
Even among the nobility, the second estate, there was this simmering discontent.
Wait, so some nobles were actually poor.
Yeah.
How did that even work?
Right. Well, not all nobility was created equal.
Okay.
You had your old established families with vast land holdings, generations of wealth,
Mm-hmm.
but you also had these newer nobles, some of whom had bought their titles or inherited, dwindling estates.
Oh, okay.
And these nobles often struggled financially,
Yeah.
and they resented wealthy commoners, especially the rising merchant class, who could buy their way into the nobility.
So there was this sort of old money versus new money dynamic,
Exactly.
even within
Within the nobility.
the nobility.
Yeah.
I can see how that would create tension,
Oh, absolutely.
for sure.
Yeah. And this internal division within the Second Estate actually weakened their position as the revolution approached. Instead of presenting a united front,
Yeah.
they were fractured by resentment
Yeah.
and economic disparity.
Okay, so we've got a glimpse into the world of the First and Second Estates,
Right.
both rife with internal tensions despite their privileges.
Yeah.
But what about the Third Estate? The vast majority of the population.
Right.
What were their lives actually like in pre-revolutionary France?
Well, the Third Estate, it was incredibly diverse,
Right.
but united by the burdens they bore.
Yeah.
Let's start with the peasants,
Okay.
who made up the vast majority of the Third Estate, about 80%.
Wow.
They were essentially trapped in the system called feudalism.
Feudalism. I vaguely remember that from history class,
Yeah.
but refresh my memory.
Okay, so basically it meant that peasants were tied to the land,
All right.
working for a lord, and owing him various taxes and services.
Okay.
So imagine having to give a portion of your crops, your labor, even your livestock, to a lord, just because he owned the land you worked on.
That sounds incredibly unfair. It's like working multiple jobs just to make ends meet.
Right.
And then having to hand over a big chunk of your earnings to someone else just because they were born into privilege.
Exactly. It was a system that had existed for centuries.
Right.
But by the 18th century, it was becoming increasingly unsustainable. You know, the population was growing, land was scarce,
Yeah.
and harvests were often poor.
Yeah.
Arthur Young, the Englishman who traveled through France in 1788, describes seeing families struggling to survive, children in rags, this pervasive sense of despair in the countryside.
It's heartbreaking to imagine,
Yeah.
but it also makes you wonder, if things were that bad, why didn't the peasants revolt sooner?
That's a great question. Part of the answer lies in the power of tradition
Okay.
and the lack of alternatives.
Okay.
For generations, peasants had accepted this system as the natural order of things.
Right.
They were often isolated in rural villages with limited access to information or education.
So they were trapped not just by the system itself,
Right.
but by a lack of awareness that things could be different.
Exactly. But by the late 18th century, things were beginning to change.
Okay.
Ideas of enlightenment, individual rights were spreading,
Okay.
even reaching the countryside.
Yeah.
And the American Revolution, which we'll get to later, also provided this powerful example of how people could rise up against an oppressive regime.
So there was this growing sense of unrest,
Yeah.
even if it hadn't fully erupted yet.
Exactly.
But it wasn't just the peasants that were feeling the strain, right?
No.
What about the urban workers, the artisans, the craftsmen, in the cities?
Right. They faced a different set of challenges,
Okay.
but no less difficult. They often worked long hours in cramped and dangerous conditions
Yeah.
with little protection or rights. One source we have compares their situation to slavery,
Oh, wow.
which might be a bit hyperbolic, but it captures the sense of exploitation
Yeah.
and powerlessness they felt.
It's striking how that source, a Parisian worker, connects his struggles to what was happening in the French colonies.
Right.
It shows how awareness of injustice was spreading, even across different social classes and geographic boundaries.
That's a key point. The French Revolution wasn't just about internal divisions.
Right.
It was also influenced by this growing awareness of global inequalities,
Yeah.
particularly in the context of colonialism and the slave trade.
So to recap, we've got the peasants burdened by feudalism and poverty.
Right.
We've got the urban workers facing exploitation and dangerous working conditions.
Yeah.
That leaves us with the bourgeoisie,
Right.
the upper crust of the Third Estate.
Yeah.
They weren't exactly living in poverty, were they?
No, their grievances were of a different nature.
Okay.
They were wealthy, educated, often more so than some nobles, but they were blocked from climbing the social ladder by the very structure of the old regime.
Right.
They could amass wealth, but not status or political power.
So it's like they were stuck in this gilded cage.
Exactly.
They had money, but not the power and prestige that came with being part of the nobility.
Yeah.
I can see how that would breed frustration.
And our sources suggest that this frustration was a key factor in their support for the revolution. The historian Christopher Hibbert,
Okay.
argues that the bourgeoisie weren't necessarily interested in destroying the aristocracy,
Okay.
but rather in joining it.
Ah, okay.
When that path was blocked, their resentment grew.
That makes sense. It wasn't about overturning the entire system,
Right.
but about having access to the same privileges and power that the nobility enjoyed.
Exactly.
But how could they possibly hope to change a system
Yeah.
that was so deeply entrenched, so legally codified?
Yeah. Well, the bourgeoisie had some key advantages.
Okay.
They were educated, they had financial resources,
Okay.
and they were connected through these networks of trade and commerce.
So they had the means to mobilize and organize,
Exactly.
to spread their ideas and influence public opinion.
Precisely. And they were also inspired by events happening elsewhere in the world,
Okay.
particularly the American Revolution.
Ah, yes, the American Revolution. The story of a group of colonists throwing off the yoke of British rule,
Right.
establishing their own republic based on ideas of liberty,
Yeah.
self-determination.
Exactly.
It must have seemed like a beacon of hope to those in France who were yearning for change.
It's hard to overstate the impact of the American Revolution on the French imagination. It provided this tangible example of how a society could overthrow an oppressive regime and establish a new system based on Enlightenment principles.
So it wasn't just internal pressure. There was
Mhm.
this external inspiration as well.
Exactly. The American Revolution showed that change was possible,
Yeah.
that revolution could succeed.
And let's not forget the financial strain that the American Revolution placed on France.
Oh, right.
King Louis XVI's decision to support the American colonists,
Yeah.
while noble in its intent, put a huge strain on the French treasury.
Right.
It's like maxing out your credit card to help your friend buy a house,
Yeah.
and then realizing you can't even afford your own rent anymore.
That's a great analogy. The financial burden of the American Revolution only added to the existing economic woes of France,
Yeah.
making the situation even more volatile.
So we've got this powder keg of a society,
Yeah.
the clergy and the nobility clinging to their privileges, the third estate struggling under the weight of inequality,
Right.
and the American Revolution serving as both inspiration
Mm-hmm.
and a financial drain.
Right.
It feels like all the ingredients for a massive explosion are in place.
They are, and it's within this context that the frustration of the bourgeoisie becomes a critical factor. You know, they're the ones with the resources, the education, the motivation to really challenge the status quo.
This is where it gets really interesting, because we often think of revolutions as being driven by the poorest and most oppressed,
Yeah.
those with literally nothing left to lose. But in the case of France, it seems like the discontent of a relatively well-off group
Yeah.
played a crucial role.
It's a reminder that change doesn't always come from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes the disillusionment of those closer to the top, those who can see the flaws in the system from a unique vantage point, to trigger a real shift in power.
So what does this all mean for us today?
Mhm.
Why should we care about these long-dead French folks and their rigid social hierarchy?
Yeah.
I mean, it all happened centuries ago.
It did, but their story reminds us that even the most entrenched systems of power
Yeah.
can be challenged.
Why?
It highlights the importance of understanding how social structures create and perpetuate inequality, and how those inequalities can eventually lead to dramatic upheaval.
And it also makes you wonder, like, what seemingly unshakable systems
Yeah.
are we living under today that might be on the verge of their own revolution? What simmering frustrations are bubbling beneath the surface, just waiting for the right spark to ignite them?
That's a question worth pondering, isn't it? And it's a testament to the enduring relevance of the French Revolution. You know, it serves as both a cautionary tale for those in power
Yeah.
and a source of inspiration for those seeking a more just and equitable world.
Well, there you have it. A glimpse into pre-revolutionary France, a society teetering on the brink of change. It's a story of inequality, frustration, and the yearning for a better world, a story that in many ways continues to resonate today.
Absolutely.
And while we haven't even gotten to the revolution itself,
Right.
understanding these underlying tensions of French society is crucial to grasping the forces that would soon unleash a torrent of change,
Yeah.
not just in France, but across Europe and the world.
Absolutely. It was a global phenomenon.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. If you want to explore more about the events that ignited the French Revolution and its lasting impact, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for future episodes.